My name is Eliza Leone. I'm the registered dietitian with Restaurant Associates at Harvard Medical School. And you are here in our virtual teaching pitching class. We do this once per month. We always like to choose really, really delicious plant-forward recipes that in general can be made and start to finish in under an hour. This recipe is an exception because the potatoes have to be boiled in advance. But aside from that, this recipe is very easy. If you have all of your ingredients in front of you, if you're cooking along, you'll see that there's not very many of them. And the amount of food waste that we're going to have in this class is minimal. So that's excellent. One last reminder, whoever is cooking along, you should have a pot of water on your stove trying to boil. You don't need it just yet, but you should start it going so it's boiling when you get there. And let's see. Hopefully you've washed all of your produce in advance, your herbs, even the lemon, I like to say. We're going to be using lemon zest. This lemon is very orange, just in case you're wondering if I'm holding an orange. It's a very orange lemon. We're going to be using lemon zest, so it's always a good idea to wash your lemon as well, even though typically you don't eat the peel. And let's see. Very important safety tip is knives. You actually want your knife to be super, super, super sharp. If it's dull, it's more likely to slip and cut you. If you have a really, really super sharp knife, then it's more likely to get a good grip and you won't slip off of what you're trying to cut. So keep that in mind. So what we're making tonight, as you know, is gnocchi. So gnocchi is a potato-based, it's kind of categorized as a pasta, but really it's more like a dumpling because it's potato based. And we're going to be tossing in some basil, some arugula, we have olives, we have lemon, parmesan, and we're making a Greek yogurt and olive oil sort of mixed sauce. So this dish, when we get to the combination point at the very end, this dish can be combined in a pan over heat, but it doesn't even need that. The only heat we need is to boil your gnocchi, and then you just toss all the ingredients together in a bowl. So it's very, very easy. So what we're gonna do first, like I said, the water should be trying to boil already. We have our potatoes here. So I've got an overhead camera. Samantha, do you mind spotlighting, dropping my potatoes?
1 second, all right, there we go.
There we go. Okay, so I've got my cooked potatoes. Samantha will be kind of switching back and forth between these two views throughout the night, make it easier for you. But these potatoes are already boiled. They still have the skin on. So the first thing we're going to do is peel the skin off. With potatoes that are already boiled, this should be pretty easy to do. I'm going to move my knife so it's not right next to my hand. I'm going to keep a little bowl nearby. And really all you need to do is just kind of like rub the skin and it comes right off. Sometimes if you've got a little knot in the potato, you might need to peel it with your hands a little bit more. But we're going to peel the skin off the potatoes here. The reason we're doing this, well, I should say the reason we didn't peel these potatoes first before we boiled them is because we didn't want the potato, like the starch of the potato, to kind of seep out into the water. We want to preserve that starch, and the skin is a good barrier to hold that in. But the reason we're removing it now at this point is because if you're following along at home or if you've done this before, you know that the skin is really like papery. So some of this is a little hard to come off. I'm using like a fingernail to get this off as well. But the skin is very papery and it's not like a very desirable texture. So you don't really want to have that in your gnocchi. So okay, some of the skin is challenging to come off, but we'll do our best here. So I'm curious, has anyone on this call ever made gnocchi before? Feel free to unmute and let me know.
I did in a local cooking class a few months ago.
Oh, a few months ago. Awesome.
Yeah, it was like a lemon.
Yeah, I think you told me that. Didn't you tell me that?
Yeah, it was a lemon ricotta one.
Ah, yeah.
Oh.
So from what you have you looked ahead at this recipe and seen how it's different than what you made with the ricotta?
It's pretty much the same. I mean, we use the little, actually, let me undo my video. These little gnocchi paddles, can you see? When we rolled,
Yeah, okay, to give like the ridges.
Yeah, and the only other thing that looked different, besides the filling being more of a lemon ricotta, was he used a 00 flour at the end to kind of dust the ricotta after they've been rolled.
Okay,
But everything else, he used regular flour for, the gnocchi itself.
got it, okay. So yeah, I mean, we're using regular flour for this as well. That 00 flour, that is something that, if this were like a professional pasta class, we might use that, but it's not as easily, you can't find
No,
it easily.
I had to go to the North End when I was in there. I
Right.
found it.
Exactly, yeah. The North End shops would for sure have it, but it's not as easy to find in a normal grocery store, so. But the benefit of using that is that it's just super, super finely ground. That's the only difference with that. So it's a bit easier to combine all of your ingredients together. But using just regular all-purpose flour is totally doable as well.
And how about, when would you use semolina flour then? Would that be for making like two pastas and like regular, um, you know, types of other
Typical,
pastas?
yeah, like typical pasta. Yeah, I think, truthfully, that would probably be a question I would have to ask our chef. I'm not actually entirely sure the different grain of semolina flour. Does anybody on this call know? If it's more finely ground or anything like that?
You mean the 00 flour?
The semolina flour.
Oh, I don't know.
I know that there are times that is like the recommended flour.
Mm.
It may be that it's like got a higher gluten content or something, so maybe it's becomes more flexible when it's combined with liquid.
Yes, actually, I'm sorry to interrupt, Eliza.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the bag and it says exceptionally high gluten content.
Okay,
Mm.
there you go.
So
Exceptional.
there you go.
Also, one other thing on the 00, I buy it regularly at Roach Brothers because I use it to make pizza. So you can find it there.
All right.
And
That's
also it's at Whole Foods.
great. Okay, Roach Brothers and Whole Foods. So yeah, the 00 flour would definitely work with this. But just your regular all-purpose flour also works. So the amount of potatoes that we're using in the recipe that you have is 1 pound. So the number of potatoes you have might be different than mine. I used 4 potatoes that made 1 pound. They're a little bit small. And the potatoes that we're using tonight, these are Yukon Gold potatoes, specifically because these ones are nice and starchy and they can get very like buttery smooth. They can mash very easily. So if you're using like new potatoes, like the little potatoes or even russets, which are like one of the most common potatoes, those can be a bit too watery and then the moisture doesn't work out and they don't get as smooth. So these Yukon Gold potatoes are definitely a good option. So I'm on my final potato. The skin is very stubborn. I'm just kind of like using my fingernails, trying to rub it off a little bit. You could use a peeler at this point, but you might end up taking off too much of the starchy potato underneath because it's already cooked. So just be careful if you're choosing that method. But so gnocchi, because it's made with, potato in addition to the flour and egg. So flour and egg is the like typical pasta ingredients, and we're adding potato to this. So it's actually more like cutting the flour in half and replacing that removed half with potato. So potatoes often in the health world get a bad rap. Potatoes are a vegetable. They're a starchy vegetable, but they're still a vegetable. And starchy vegetables have their place in a diet just the same as anything does. Potatoes, I think part of the reason why they get a bad rap is because they're made into French fries. So people just automatically think of potatoes as French fries. That's not true. This is a root. This grows out of the ground. It's packed with potassium. It's got lots of vitamin C, lots of fiber. So there are lots of beneficial nutrients in potatoes, not just sweet potato. Just because it's white or yellowy, that doesn't mean, white doesn't mean bad when it comes to food. All right, I've got all of this, all the skin stuck to my gloves here, but finally done peeling these potatoes. And we're gonna move on to our next step, which is to mash the potatoes in a bowl. So I'm putting them all in this big bowl. If you have a wide bowl, that's better than like a deeper one, even if it's not very shallow, or even if you just use a plate, it would be totally fine. And I'm just using a fork. You can use a masher, like an avocado masher, if you have one, or just use your fork. Trying to make this as accessible as possible. You don't need all the fancy tools to make gnocchi. So also, Bev was just showing her the paddle that she used when she took her gnocchi class. That is, you know, most of the time when you buy gnocchi or when you get it in a restaurant, it has like ridges on it. You can do that with a fork, or you can do that with that paddle that she showed, or as we're doing in class tonight, you don't actually need that at all. You can just cut the gnocchi into pieces and that's it. You don't have to do the ridges at all. The ridges are just kind of like a nice little flourish, make it look a little fancy, but definitely not necessary. If you are doing a pan sauce, like a marinara sauce or something to go with your gnocchi, having the ridges on the gnocchi can help the sauce stick to it a little bit easier. But with this nice, thick, creamy Greek yogurt sauce that we're doing tonight, the sauce sticks just fine. So there's no need for the ridges. So what I'm doing here, I'm basically, now that I've got all the big chunks gone, I'm basically using the fork and just kind of like raking it through little bit by little bit, trying to make sure that I don't have any big lumps left in there. I'm kind of holding my fork like with my finger on top, to get a little bit of pressure. And I'm rotating the bowl as I go around, making sure that all the lumps are gone. If you do end up with any lumps in the end, it's fine. It's not a deal breaker. You're not going to spit it out and think you wasted your time making this gnocchi. It's still going to be delicious. So mashing this all up, almost there. All right. And once this is mashed up, we're gonna do our flour and egg. So I'm actually gonna start a new bowl because we're gonna add the potato into the flour. All right, making sure I didn't miss any, but seems pretty smooth to me. How's everybody doing at home?
Eliza, I have a question. Why do you add the, oh, it's Laurie. Why do you add the potato to the flour as opposed to just put the flour and egg on top of the potato?
So I suppose you probably could do that, but I find that when you have the dry ingredients and then you kind of like make a well in the middle, if you've ever made pasta, that's kind of the process for that as well. I find that that allows you to kind of control the amount of flour that's going in at each, you know,
I see.
swipe. But that doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. You can make this a, you know, adding the flour into the potato if you want.
Okay, thank you.
A spoon out of this drawer here. All right, so I've got my flour. This is 1 cup of flour, I believe is what the recipe said. Double check myself. 1 cup of flour, and this is half a teaspoon of kosher salt. So I'm mixing the salt into the flour. Just going to give it a quick toss just to combine that first. All right. And then, like I said, we're going to kind of make a well in the middle, push the flour out to the outer edges. And I'm going to take my potato and just scoop it into the middle there. And I'm going to crack the egg on the top as well. So egg is not actually a required ingredient for gnocchi. You can, I'm gonna crack this on the flat surface rather than on the edge, because the edge kind of makes it more likely to get shell pieces in there. So I'm gonna crack this on a flat surface. But egg, you can make gnocchi without egg. You don't need it. So I actually had somebody, I'm gonna change my gloves. If you just cracked your egg, then make sure you wash your hands. But I have somebody attending the in-person class in a couple days on Thursday, and she has an egg allergy. So I'm just not gonna give her an egg, and the gnocchi comes out completely fine, completely delicious. So it's up to you. Adding to egg, you know, the egg is used as a binder, but the moisture in the potato allows, you know, that serves as a binder as well. And by adding an egg, also, we're getting like a little boost of protein in there too. But if you're wanting to make this, you know, vegan, then you can do that as well. All right, so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. I'm just sort of turning my bowl bit by bit, pulling a little bit of flour in from the side. And the egg will get just sort of mixed in as you go around. So I'm starting out with like a nice wide spoon to do this. And then once the spoon starts to just like get stuck to everything, I'm just gonna use my hands. It becomes much easier to do that instead. Everybody doing okay at home?
Eliza, we have a question. So
Yeah.
if people wanted to watch this recording back, where would we be able to do that? Would you email it to them?
Yeah, I'm gonna send this recording to everybody. I will send it by Friday. Hopefully I will get it out tomorrow or Thursday. But yeah, everyone will have the recording. I'll send it to you. Don't worry. And all of our recordings actually from all past classes. So now this is getting too sticky. You can see it's sticking to my spoon. I'm just gonna start using my hands at this point. But all virtual classes that I've ever done are all on YouTube. So on the YouTube channel that you see when I send you this recording, you're gonna see all the other videos that we've done. So I'm just kind of like scooping up the potato mass and flattening it out, scooping it up again. Over and over here, just trying to get the flour to stick to it. You're gonna have some potato that's stuck to the bottom of the bowl, so just try and scoop that up a little bit. And I know it might seem, as long as you did the measured proportions that we talked about, it might seem like this is a lot of flour, but it will all be incorporated. So just keep on going. So the goal is you want to be able to handle this without it being super sticky on your hands. It might be sticky right now, but once you get more flour in there, it'll be less sticky. So you'll see, I'm really starting to use up this flour that was all on the bottom. Hopefully you're seeing the same at home. So this process can actually be done as well with sweet potato. If you wanted to make sweet potato gnocchi, a lot of the sweet potato gnocchis that you see in the store have sugar added, which is kind of a bummer because sweet potatoes are so sweet naturally, like it doesn't need any added sugar. So if you wanted sweet potato gnocchi that doesn't have sugar added, you can do this same process. All right, so we're almost there.
Eliza, I have a question about nutrition in potatoes and if this is like a wives' tale. I feel like when I was a kid, my mom told me that I'd eat the skins of potatoes because most of the nutrients were like right under the skin. Is that true?
So, I mean, fiber for sure is in the skin, not only in the skin, but I have not ever heard that. I know that that is the case. This is not what you're asking, but salmon, a lot of the healthy fats are right under the skin, but that's because it's an animal. The fat is right under the skin. This is a plant. We're not talking about fat. I don't think that that's the case. I've never heard that. I could be wrong, but you know, most of the potato is like the meat of it, you know, not just under the skin. So I feel like I would have heard that over the years that were the case, but not to discredit your mom. Moms are very smart. Okay. Oh shoot, I meant to have extra flour, but I don't. Whoopsie. Okay, I'm gonna try and see if I can do this without extra flour. If you have extra flour, put some of that down on your cutting board. And we're gonna break this big ball of dough into 4 pieces. So it doesn't have to be exact. I actually have, this is a really handy tool. If you have a bench scraper at home, that's very helpful. You don't want to use a knife that you're going to use for cutting things up later because there's raw egg in here. So whatever you use to cut up the gnocchi, make sure it's not the same knife that you use to cut the raw veggies. So what I'm doing here, I'm just cutting that in half roughly, doesn't have to be exact, and then in half again to give us quarters. So very rough quarters there. I'm setting 3 of them aside, and we're gonna roll this out. Okay, so we're gonna make like a log, and like a long skinny log. I'm gonna use basically like the backs of my fingers to start. And I'm kind of pulling outward as I roll. So it might seem weird at first because the dough is so delicate, but as you go through and do all 4 quarters of this, you're really going to get the hang of it. So I'm pulling very gently with my fingers. I don't want to rip it. I don't want to squish it either, so I'm not applying too much pressure. But what you want is a log that's like about maybe like a foot long, a little more than a foot. This one is probably a little more than a foot. And it's going to be about, what really matters, not so much the length, but the width. You want the width to be about 1 inch. All right. And you also want to have like a sheet pan or a plate or something close by. So when you cut the gnocchi, you can put it right onto that sheet pan in a single layer so it doesn't all stick to each other. I'm going to move some dishes out of the way. Okay, so the ends here are, you know, a little pointed, but if you want, you can kind of square them off, or you could just chop off the ends if you want all of the gnocchi to look the same. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do like 1 inch. And go all the way down the line. A little bit sticky because I don't have that extra flour, but if you have extra flour, then I'm sure it's not sticky. You'll see also, I was saying that it doesn't matter if you mash every single last lump in the potato. I definitely have some little pieces of potato in there, but who cares? Makes it rustic. So if you find that what you're cutting with is getting sticky, you can dip a towel in some water and wipe it off. Try and make it not sticky. Another great benefit of using something like a bench scraper is you can just pick everything up off your counter. I'm going to try and make sure these are single layer, not touching each other. So yeah, then this just begins the repetitive process of cutting this gnocchi. This is the kind of thing that, you know, if you were making this at home, not on a Zoom call, it can be like a nice relaxing process. Although I hope that it's relaxing right now as well. Just kind of going through the motions, repeating the same process over and over. So moving on to the next quarter of this dough, start rolling it out. You could also kind of like form it in your hands a little bit before you lay it down on the cutting board if you wanted to. But using your fingers to pull it as you roll it, to stretch it out. Anybody having any issues with this part at home? Everyone doing okay, I hope?
Eliza, how long does the the gnocchi dough last in the refrigerator? So you can make it and let it sit in the refrigerator until you're ready to use it, or how many days did you say?
Yeah, good question. So I would say you would want to use it within 5 days. But the good thing is, if you can't use it within 5 days, this freezes very, very well.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, as long as you just toss it with a good amount of flour, so they're not sticking to each other at all before you put it in the freezer.
Hmm.
And you can, freeze it for a year and use it whenever.
Okay.
And it's funny, like the dough is so delicate right now, but after you cook it, it really is not delicate. It still stays nice and fluffy and like pillowy. That's what the adjective they like to use when describing gnocchi. Stays nice and pillowy, but it it keeps its shape after it's cooked. So you can freeze it raw, or you can freeze it once you've cooked it. Either way.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And also a great thing is this cooks so fast. Has anybody here ever made homemade pasta and seen how fast it cooks?
Yeah.
It's 3 minutes, if that. So gnocchi is the same thing. Very, very fast. So if there are any Italian speakers on the call, you might be criticizing the way I'm saying gnocchi. I feel like non-Italian speakers either say gnocchi or gnocchi, but really, I'm told that it's kind of something in between, more like gnocchi. So, if you want to test your Italian skills, but I've also read that gnocchi has been like the first recipe for gnocchi was believed to have been written in like the 1st century AD. So this is a very, 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 very old recipe. Very traditional Italian recipe or Roman recipe. And you can imagine, because it's using ingredients that are not new or exciting. They didn't have a bench scraper back then, but they probably had some other tool similar to that. So right now I'm on my 3rd quarter of dough. So I think we're doing okay on time. Once we roll out this gnocchi, we're gonna let it sit for a little bit until we have prepped all of the other ingredients. And then we cook it, because we want it to be cooked, we want it to still be hot right at the end. So anyone who's taken these classes before, or anyone that was in the culinary medicine course, you have likely heard me or Chef Raul say that we have our plan of work. We have all the recipes that we're trying to make, or all the ingredients we're trying to prepare, to have them all done at the same time, to reach their best quality. So we could cook the gnocchi now, but then it would be cold. So instead, we're letting it sit, which doesn't, negatively affect the recipe in any way. We're just letting it sit for a little bit while we prepare the other ingredients. And then we cook it. And having the gnocchi be hot when you mix it with all the other ingredients is essential, because that allows the Parmesan cheese to melt. It allows the Greek yogurt to really like smooth out and mix with everything. It wilts the greens, the basil and the arugula that we're using. So it really helps to have the gnocchi be nice and hot. So I think you can see in my side of the screen here, all the little gnocchis in this pan. All right, and I'm moving on to my last quarter of dough. We're almost there with the cutting process. So also keep an eye on your boiling water. If it's already boiling, then that's great. You can leave the lid on so it doesn't evaporate too much. If it's not boiling yet, then make sure there is a lid on it to bring it to a boil, to try and trap that heat inside. All right, so this looks like it's about 1 inch wide. I'm gonna flatten out my ends a little bit and cut. I'm holding my hand here because it's right at the edge of the counter. I don't want this to fall off. This bench scraper, if you don't have it, if you don't have one, this is like a really fun tool. Also like a dough cutter. It's got measurements on there. So if you're making like a biscuit or something like that, or scones, something like this is very helpful. Also helpful if you're just like cutting vegetables and you have a bunch of veggies to scoop and put into the pan. This big scoop is like a shovel. All right. So that was the last of the gnocchi. I'm gonna get rid of I'm gonna flip over my cutting board to move to the next step because there's raw egg on this side of the cutting board. So I'm gonna make some more room for my gnocchi I just cut. So is everyone kind of wrapping up the gnocchi part? Need to take a little bit of time before we move on to the next step. Let me know.
I'm a little behind, but keep going because I'm trying to use a little rolly thing. So keep going.
Okay. You have to show us. You have to show us in the end what it looks like.
Okay, it's you know what, it's the I didn't mash my potatoes well enough, so it's a little rustic looking right now, but that's all good, all good.
I love rustic.
I know.
When you say it's supposed to look rustic, it just takes the pressure off. We can't all have perfect smooth gnocchi. All right, I'm flipping my cutting board over, or you can grab a new cutting board. Change my gloves. My water definitely seems like it's boiling here. I'm just gonna confirm. Yep. So I'm keeping my lid on because I don't want it to evaporate or evaporate too much. All right. So what we're gonna do now is prep all of the ingredients that go into the rest of this dish. So this really doesn't take long at all, very quick. So what we're first going to do, and I'm gonna recommend that you just grab a bowl and keep it close by because you can just throw most of these ingredients right into a bowl and that's where you're going to toss the finished gnocchi in the end. So bringing my knife back over, just got my bowl to the side. So what I'm going to do first, I think the most time consuming one is I've got basil here. It's a little bit wilty, but not too bad. So what I'm going to do is pull all the leaves of the basil off. So if you get to know what the basil, how it grows, it kind of all grows like at the end. Here, let me, easier to see like this. It all all the leaves grow toward the end. You can just kind of like pinch them all off. Or if you've got a bigger stem like this one, it's got leaves further down. You can fold the leaves all to one side of the stem and pinch them off that way, just to make your work a little bit faster. So we're going to use like a decent amount of basil in this. It's up to you how much you'd like to use. But basil is such a floral, like delicious addition to pasta dishes and something like this dish as well. It's really like, there's not any crazy flavors in this dish. There's no spices. We've got lemon, which is obviously like nice and tangy and sour. We've also got lemon zest, which gives you like the flavor of lemon without being sour. Then we have the Greek yogurt and the olives, which are kind of like tangy, earthy. And we have our really floral, herbal basil. And we've got our parmesan, which is nice and savory and salty. So we have a good variety of types of flavors in this dish without being like super overpowering. So this is a dish where you're really gonna taste like, you know, something like basil. This is like a great way to showcase fresh basil because it's one of the few ingredients in this dish. So it's just like a nice prominent flavor without being, you know, overshadowed by anything else that's more prominent. All right, so I've kind of got like a big mound of basil leaves here. These are pretty big basil leaves if you're wondering how the size of yours compare. Let's see. Okay. So there are a couple ways that we can cut this. I think one of the easiest cheat ways when you have a big pile of basil, especially when it's just gonna all get tossed into pasta anyway. So the way it looks doesn't have to be perfect. Again, if we're going with the rustic theme, what we can do, anytime you have something leafy, where it's like a big loose pile, the tighter you can get it, the easier it will be to chop. So I'm just gonna like bunch all of this together. You could roll it up if you wanted to put one big leaf on the bottom and then pile a bunch of other leaves on top and roll it up. That would be the chiffonade method. But what I'm doing here is just kind of like a lazy person's chiffonade. So I bunched it up into a pile and trying to keep it as tight together as possible while I'm slicing through. It's gonna kind of come apart at some point, which is fine. You just push it back together, kind of rotate it, go back through again. The more you cut it, the less you need to bunch it together. Because it's not a big poofy pile anymore. So I'm just roughly chopping. This is definitely what you call a rough chop. We're not mincing it. There's no need to mince. But we do want it to be chopped up so it gets mixed in well to the dish. So this is what the basil is looking like right now. Got some bigger pieces, some smaller pieces, nice rough chop. So I'm gonna scoop this into my bowl. So I've got just a big bowl where I'm gonna put the basil and the other ingredients we prepare. All right, putting that back to the side. Next, we're gonna do arugula. We're basically gonna cut this in the exact same way. I've got two bowls here. These bowls are about a cup. So this is like two cups roughly, 1.5 cups of arugula. And whenever you measure something leafy like this in a volume, you really would like, you know, the preferred way of saying it is like a packed cup, because some people might pack the arugula and measure it. Some people might not pack it and measure it. If you say packed, then it's nice and condensed, and that's a more accurate measurement. So like I said, bunching this all up just like we did the basil. And I'm putting the tip of my knife down and rocking the knife down. The tip of my knife is not leaving the cutting board. You probably can't hear the crunch of this because Zoom is good at eliminating background noise, but this is a nice satisfying crunch. So I just turned it 45 degrees and I'm going back in the other direction. I'm pretty satisfied with that already. I don't even think I'm gonna go back through again. So it's little sort of medium-sized pieces, not too small. I'm putting that in the bowl with the basil, a nice big bowl. All right. The next thing we're gonna put into this bowl is we're gonna grate Parmesan. So this Parmesan is nice and aged. We're gonna use our microplane or grater of any kind. You want it to be nice, finely grated. I was gonna grate it into a bowl, but I'm not gonna confine myself. So I'm just going back and forth here on this microplane. I believe the recipe says a 1/4 cup. Actually, no, I think it just says Parmesan for grating. So then this is up to you. This is up to you, however much you'd like to use, depending on how much cheese you like. You can also obviously put more cheese on top at the end as a garnish. But grating Parmesan on a microplane is always so fun because it gets so fluffy. Just a big pile of fluffy cheese. Nice and fluffy. All right, so this I would say is like a loose half cup of Parmesan. I'm gonna leave it there. I'm gonna put that also in the bowl with the, so far it's asparagus, basil, and Parmesan. Right? So while we have our microplane, we're gonna move on to our lemon. So zesting a lemon, you're gonna do this a little bit differently than you just grated the Parmesan. So if you're using still got some cheese in my microplane, but that's all right. If you're using a microplane, you're gonna turn it so that the cup side, the concave side is facing up, the grating side is facing down. And you're gonna hold your lemon and you're gonna basically run the microplane down the length of your lemon. And you're gonna catch all that zest in the top, like in this little cup part of the microplane. Rather than zesting it, like, quickly zesting it back and forth, like grating it, like we just did with the Parmesan, we're gonna be catching the zest in the top of the microplane here. And then we're just gonna dump it right into that bowl. So if you missed any spots, you can just kind of go around the bottom. And you may have heard this before, but really when you zest citrus fruit, you don't really want to zest too much of like the whiter part underneath because that can be bitter. The flavor that you want to get is the colorful part on top. All right. So nice and efficient way of zesting something. So I'm just going to take this zest and just plop it right up in there. Done. So in this bowl, to review, we have arugula, basil, Parmesan, and lemon zest. All right. Last thing we're gonna cut right now is, back to the lemon. I'm just gonna cut this lemon in half real quick because we're gonna use this to juice later. So now I'm gonna set that aside. All right, last thing we're gonna cut are olives. These are nice mixed olives, marinated a little bit in some herbs. I'm just gonna, dump a few of them out and we're gonna slice them. Again, as much or as little as you wanna use, totally up to you. These olives do not have pits because that's much easier to handle. So you could just throw these into the pasta as is, but I know this is kind of far away from the camera, but I'm slicing them very thinly. Well, I guess not so thinly, very carefully is what I meant to say. So we got some nice little olive slices here. And olives, the tanginess and the saltiness of olives brings like a really interesting addition to this dish. We are going to be, or the recipe says, you can choose to follow this or not, but the recipe says that we are going to be tossing these olives in with the rest of the greens and everything. So we'll just put this right into the bowl that we've been adding to. But if you don't really like olives as much, or you're a little bit unsure of how they'll taste in this dish, you could just sprinkle a little bit on top as a garnish rather than mixing it all in together. All right, almost done with these. I'm going to do a time check. So it's 6:20 right now. I think we're doing okay with time. How's everybody with the cutting and prepping process? Any questions?
Oh, I have a question. It's
Yes.
Laurie. So, I don't like olives, but I'm assuming I could use capers. So it would be similar.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, that would give like a nice salty flavor that the olives bring.
Thank you.
All right, so we've got a nice little pile of some sliced olives here. Like I said, I'm choosing to throw them into the bowl, but you don't have to. So I'm adding my olives here. I'm going to make sure I toss all of them in. And then one last thing we have to do before we move on to cook the gnocchi, and that is we're going to mix our yogurt and olive oil. So in the recipe, I've got a 50-50 plain Greek yogurt and olive oil, like the same ratio. You can choose to do that. Like I said, I always say in these classes that I want the recipe to be a guideline for you. Everyone has different taste preferences, so you can choose to make this however you'd like. So what I'm doing is I'm just scooping the 1/4 cup of yogurt into a larger bowl. And I'm pouring in the 1/4 cup of olive oil. And I'm whisking. So at first it seems like it's not coming together, but hopefully it comes together nice and smoothly. Takes a little bit of time. And what we're gonna do with this, once we've whisked it, is set it aside. And when it comes time to toss all of the cooked gnocchi in with the other ingredients that we prepped, then we're gonna toss this in there as well. So you may find that it's a little bit watery, a little bit more watery than you wanted. You can add more Greek yogurt if you'd like. But basically what we have here is like a yellowy yogurt because of the color of the olive oil. All right, so I'm setting that aside until it's time to toss everything together. And so keep in mind how much olive oil is in that mixture, because you may not need to add olive oil on top as much as you normally would. Okay, so I'm making some room so I can bring my burner under the camera so you can see what I'm doing. All right, and I'm checking on my water again, which should be boiling. Yep, we're good to go. I can take the lid off now. Okay, I have to move the pot, then move the burner, then move the pot back. I want to be spilling my hot water on myself. All right, so here's the burner so you all can see. Here's my water. This is actually the same water that I used to boil the potatoes. Just because it was already hot, I kind of just kept it going. So I'm also using an induction burner, which brings things to a boil very fast. I'm steaming up my camera. Oopsie. I'll move that out of the way a tiny bit so it doesn't steam as much. But okay. So this is boiling. Everyone that's cooking along, are you ready to put in your gnocchi?
This is Bev, I'm ready.
Okay. All right.
You want me to show you that little, let's see if you can you see him?
Hold on. I have to scroll over to your.
Oh, wait a minute. My video's not on. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
Did you want before I cook them? So they look okay. They look definitely rustic.
That's awesome. That was great. Yeah. Awesome. I love it.
Would you want to show everybody real quick? We just put you on spotlight if we can see it one more time.
Yeah,
Oh,
let's see
sure.
one more time.
Oh, I like
looks great.
them. Oh, they look great, Bev.
Nice.
Well, I
They
think
look
I
really
pressed too hard, and I think the potatoes are a little chunky. They didn't roll easily, you know?
Yeah, I know. That's the thing. The dough is so delicate. So if
It's
you're
very delicate.
pulling with that board, you can squish them so easily.
Yeah, it's almost better, I think, to do it your way with this.
I mean, you know, both ways are.
It was fun.
It's gonna be delicious regardless. So okay, so I've got my pan of gnocchi here. I'm gonna use my bench scraper. And I'm just gonna plop these right in. Try not to let the hot water splash up and burn me. But these are, you're gonna know that these are done cooking because they float, which is really cute and fun. They float right up to the top, just like if you've ever made homemade pasta before. That also floats. The reason for that, anybody know? Take a guess.
They get filled with the water? Do they get filled with the water and float up?
Not with water.
Oh, air?
Moisture, air. The moisture already inside the gnocchi evaporates out, but the outside has already cooked. So the air gets trapped. And they float up to the top like little balloons, little potato balloons. So I have this ridiculously big, I am in a commercial kitchen after all, so I have a giant pasta spider thing. And I'm making sure that these are not stuck to the bottom, because that could prevent them from floating to the top and then they would be overcooked. So you'll see, it looks like this water has stopped boiling. That is the case. That's because we put the, we disturbed the temperature and we disturbed like the density of what's in this pot. So the water has stopped boiling, but that doesn't mean it's not hot. It's still cooking this gnocchi. So I can see, I don't know if you can see. It's a little hard to tell. Yeah, I mean, you can see that the water is kind of like moving around. There's still some movement in there. So the gnocchi is definitely still cooking and it's gonna float to the top, even though the water is not like bubbling and pushing it up. So it really only takes like 3 minutes. And if you choose to not cook all of this right now, if you choose to freeze some of it and then cook it another time, you can do the same exact process, take it straight from the freezer and put it right into the water and it will cook that way. It'll take like a little bit longer because it was cold to start with, but it still comes to a boil. Or sorry, still comes to the top, still floats at the top. So while this is going, I'm gonna make sure I have all my ingredients all good to go. I've shown you already, we've got this bowl, trying to fit it under this camera. We've got this bowl with arugula, basil, parmesan, I can show on this camera. Olives, lemon zest, and that's it, I think. So once this boils, oh, you can see one of them, oh, they're starting to pop up. So
It's like it's escaping.
I know. This is almost like making popcorn too, when you like start to hear the popcorn come up.
Oh, like Jiffy Pop, where it would like the things kept on moving.
Yeah. So it's starting to come up very slowly. They come up. It's just like such a fun process.
Eliza, when like a couple of
Yes.
them float, or do you wait for all of them to float?
You're gonna wait for all of them to float. Good question. Good question. It's okay if they've been floating for a little while, and then while you're waiting for the other ones to float, that's okay. And actually, what I have liked to do in the times that I've made this recipe is once they're all floating, I like to let it go like another 30 seconds or something, just to make sure it's all good. There's raw egg, but the egg is definitely cooked at this point. That's not a concern. What you really want to make sure is that they taste like, they don't taste like raw dough. Like, all of us, I'm sure, have had raw cookie dough or something when you can taste like the flour, like the uncooked flour. That's what we're trying to avoid. So we've definitely got a lot of them floating here, but I still see some down the bottom. I keep stirring a little bit because I want to make sure they're not on the bottom because they're stuck. They're only on the bottom because they're not ready to float yet. But they're coming up very slowly.
Is it possible to overcook these?
It is possible. They can kind of just fall apart. But if they're, okay, I think all of them are floating at this point. So like I said, I'm gonna let it go like 30 seconds maybe. And we will be totally good. We're not gonna, oh, I still see, okay, this one is a bigger one, so it took a little longer to cook. But yeah, definitely want to not let them sit there like a whole lot longer once they're all floating at the top. They're kind of like resettling themselves, getting into a single layer. It's like they're like minds of their own moving around at the top. Okay, so I know we're at 6:30, so we're almost at the very end of this. We're so close. Those of you cooking at home, are yours floating yet? We're getting there. They're getting there.
This is Bev, mine are done.
They're done, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so these have sat for a little bit. I'm gonna use this giant scoop and I'm gonna scoop them out and let as much water drip off as I can. Not sure if you can maybe from my white shirt or my black shirt, you can see a little bit of water dripping off. There's not a lot to drip. And then I'm just dumping it straight into this bowl with all the greens and stuff. So I'm gonna scoop everything out, turn off my heat. Let all the water drip off. Dump it right in that bowl. So what you're gonna see in this bowl is the greens are gonna start to wilt, the cheese is gonna melt, and everything is gonna come together. So again, I'm gonna move this out of the way because I want you to see what I'm doing. So give me one sec. But if you're starting to mix, then go for it. I would recommend using a silicone spatula if you have one, because that can be nice and gentle with the gnocchi. You don't wanna squish the gnocchi. You'll notice that the texture is definitely, more resilient, not so delicate anymore. But using a silicone spatula, that's a nice, gentle way to fold everything together. So I'm gonna pour in my Greek yogurt and, where's my whisk? I'm gonna whisk the yogurt and the olive oil a little bit more, separate it a little. I think depending on the ratio you use, the olive oil and the yogurt might separate or it might not. But I'm pouring all of that in. And I'm folding it together. So I'm sure you've heard that term before, fold your ingredients together. Oftentimes that's used when people talk about like making muffin batter or something like that. But it's basically what I'm doing here is scooping around and flopping it over, scooping around, flopping it over. So you're not stirring it like this, but you're making sure everything gets combined without agitating it too much, because you don't want to squish this gnocchi. I can smell that lemon zest. The heat really brought out the smell of the lemon zest. Got lots and lots of greens here that look super good and appetizing. All right. So what I'm going to do now, this is essentially the recipe. This is basically it. So I'm going to scoop it into a serving plate. We can garnish it with our remaining ingredients. So let me try and do this under the camera so you can see. But definitely give it a taste if you haven't already. Taste the gnocchi and see how fluffy it is, how much the texture has changed since it's now cooked. I'm gonna do a little bit more parmesan on top. Got parmesan. We also have red pepper flakes. Those are a great addition to something like this. A little bit of spice, not too much. So I've got a little red pepper flakes. It also adds a nice color, pop of color. Hopefully you can see the red pepper flakes. Also, we've got our lemon. So I'm gonna do a little bit of lemon juice. You can use a juicer or you can just juice it by hand. And let's see, gonna add a little bit of black pepper as well, because we didn't add any of that yet. And we had a little bit of salt in the dough, but if you want to add more salt at this point, totally go for it. You can also add some more olives on top if you want like some whole olives. Throw those in there. And that's the dish. There's our gnocchi. So it's got this Greek yogurt creamy sauce. It's got like tangy flavors, a little bit of spicy with the red pepper. You've got bitter from the arugula, really herbal and floral from the lemon zest and the basil. So I would love to see, Samantha, can you do the grid view? And I want to see everybody's, or the gallery view. If you cooked along, I want to see your dish.
Let me figure out how to do that real quick. 1 second.
Okay. I think I did my gallery view. I think it's going to capture in the recording.
Let me just remove spotlight, see. Let's see this.
Trying to get mine on. This is
Oh,
Bev.
it's beautiful,
I
Bev.
can see it. That's beautiful.
And people are waiting to eat.
Well, I hope they like it. They saw how hard you worked on it, so they're really gonna love it. I know we're a little bit over. I appreciate everybody hanging around, but I really hope you enjoy this dish. Gnocchi can be made with so many different types of ingredients, so many different types of sauces, but this is a nice creamy sauce option that is, you know, packed with protein, packed with calcium. It's delicious, and I hope you feel very happy and confident in yourself that you just made gnocchi by hand from scratch.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Eliza.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Eliza.
Again, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.